Hello out there, and welcome back to our second episode of My Grocery Adventure. My name is Carly Wharton, and I am your host. Today, I am joined again by Tom Mulholland. We will be continuing to dive into his story of creating an impact for his small community in Iowa. We did our first episode of My Grocery Adventure with him as well. So if you're curious about his backstory, his upbringing, kind of all the parts that lead up to what we're going to be adding on to the story today, we left you on a bit of a cliffhanger at the end of that first episode as far as a really, really challenging point in any person's story. To go through a fire, to go through something that's so destructive and kind of one fell swoop to have the rug be pulled out from under you. So that's what we're really going to dive into in this second episode, the turmoil that absolutely had to have been, and the road to rebuilding and the perseverance and resilience that it takes to do such a thing. So lots to get into in today's episode, possibly some heavy territory, but that's life. And before we dive in, I do want to welcome Tom Mulholland back to My Grocery Adventure. Welcome back.
Good morning, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we get into your story of kind of where we left off last time with that phone call of the store is on fire and we need you to get back down here, go ahead and tell us like about this picture that you have behind you that you're using as your backdrop.
This is a mural that was painted on the side of my building. It was paid for by a grant from the Iowa Cultural Affairs Department, and our local artist, same artist that painted the painting I used for my backdrop last week, did that. Zach Jones owns the Iowa Art Church and is an amazing artist. I won the statewide business pitch contest years ago. One of the things that I commented about for my community is how some local talents had seen that they could prosper here in our community, thanks to what I was doing possibly, and had moved back. Zach had a studio down in the Phoenix area and had come back to Malvern, has been very successful, has traveled around the country doing murals for other people. He is very well known here in the Midwest and different areas around the country. But this was something that I allowed. They asked my permission to put on the side of the building, and I was thrilled to have it. Our town has a 63-mile long bike trail that goes through the heart of our community. It's called the Wabash Trace Nature Trail. It goes from Council Bluffs, Iowa, down to the Missouri state line. And this is a person on a bicycle on an area of the trace that is well recognized. And it brought so many bicyclists to sit in the park next to my building to enjoy that, to come in and buy drinks or salads or things like that. Our community was blessed with the positioning of where we were on this trail. It was just a great stopping point for many people, and it really made my business more popular and well known. And it's all of these little things that you can take advantage of that can really help any business, no matter what type of business you are.
Like tying in with what's going on in the community, kind of like you were
Yes.
talking about last time. Yeah.
Yes.
There was there's such a thing as called community capital, and like basically the idea is that you're taking advantage of kind of the assets that your community already has, so the bike trail and playing that up on the side of your store.
Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to ask you about, if you want to talk a little bit more about why meat cutting, like why was that what drew your focus, and kind of the whole career, the school, the experience. I mean, it looks like it worked out really well, but I'm curious how you got started on that path.
Honestly, it was just timing was the issue. I had worked in the grocery store carrying out groceries when I was younger, Saturdays, summers, things like that. Um, when I had graduated from high school, just about that time, one of the meat cutters at the store left and they were looking for help. And, okay, fine. I'll give that a try. I enjoyed working at the store. I enjoyed waiting on the customers, having the chance to talk to them. And I started doing that. My dad's partner, Cork, was an excellent meat cutter, very well experienced. Um, and I learned quite a bit from him. But after a couple of years, I kind of had the idea that I could probably learn more if I went to a school and I could learn other methods besides what his normal things were. I could learn quicker than
Mhm.
what I could in a small town like this. And I thought that that would be a good way to improve my lot in life, improve, the store for the future by being a better meat cutter, knowing how to do different things and having different experiences. So I did that. Western Iowa Tech Community College in Sioux City offered a meat cutting program that was about 6 months to 2 quarters. And, I went up there and I took that. And I really enjoyed it. I had been cutting meat for a little bit before that, um, because I had more experience than the others in the class. They called me Tom Terrific, just teased me about that. But I was always very bright, and it wasn't just about meat cutting. We had to take other classes also. We had to take a microbiology class to learn about food safety.
Mhm.
Uh, and I excelled in that very well. It was something I'd had, the background for from high school. We had to take some basic English courses so that we could learn how to fill out a resume or a cover letter, things like that to help our possible positioning later in life. Basic math classes, which I just tested out. They wanted you to be able to do the things you need to as a meat cutter.
Mhm.
But it was a good time in my life. I was running, and I actually had the time to run a lot. I'd run one marathon before that in 4 hours and 43 minutes, and without training for it properly. Now I had the time. I joined the YMCA while I was in Sioux City. They had a student rate. I had the time after classes each day. I ran the Lincoln Marathon that year, and I ran 3 hours and 6 minutes. I cut over an hour and a half off of my time. And
You're talking a full 26-mile marathon
yeah,
in
yeah,
3 hours? What kind of an average mile is that?
I think that was a little over 7 minutes if I remember right. But
7 minutes,
running,
26 times.
yeah, but running that time had never been on my you know thoughts. Now I'm very close to the qualifying standards for the Boston Marathon. You had to break at my age, you had to break 3 hours back then to run the Boston Marathon. And I kept trying. I made like 7 more attempts over the next 10 years and got so close 306, 303, 302, 310, 301. And then finally, a few years later, I ran a 2:55 marathon and ran the Boston Marathon the following year. That was right when I changed jobs and started working in Omaha, commuting. So I didn't have quite the time to train, but it was still a lifelong goal that I was able to achieve. And it also shows something that has stuck out very often in my life, that I don't give up.
Yeah,
I'm going to overcome whatever I have to do something.
I get
And I've done that many times in my life, and business is just like that.
mm, wow. Gosh. So 8 attempts to be able to
I
go to
think that was right. Yeah.
yeah. So what
Yeah.
year did you actually run it then?
I qualified at the 1988 Lincoln Marathon, and I ran the 1989 Boston Marathon then.
I was born in 1988. I don't know if you know that. We were doing something slightly different at that time. Oh, that is so freaking cool. And I love that connection that, that determination
Yeah.
doesn't just come out in a business setting. It's just who you are.
One of my grade school teachers had me come back and talk to a class at one point about going for your goals and having goals, first of all, and not letting life stop you, doing whatever it took to do that, to meet your goals and to enjoy your life better because you do have aspirations and think you can do better things.
Yeah. Has having goals, is that something that just kind of always was part of who you are, or was there a role model that you had that taught you to set
I
goals?
think
Or
it was I think it was basically just me. I'd always enjoyed running track and field, watching road races here in Iowa, the Drake Relays or something big. And I never qualified for the state championships or the Drake Relays when I was in high school. So after running the Boston Marathon, my next goal was the Drake Relays. They had one race that they called the Masters 800 meters, half a mile basically, and you had to be 40 years of age to do it. I was conference champion in the half mile in the 880 when I was in high school, and I was still running a lot back in those days. I was winning races still at the age of my upper 30s occasionally. And I set my sights on the Drake Relays. And I did run that Masters 800. There was 33 in the race. It was the biggest crowd they'd ever had for that. 33 of us starting on the curve on a track was too much, and they had to stop the race twice and restart it because I got knocked down. It wasn't just somebody random; it was me. But I ended up running only 4 seconds slower at the age of 40 than what I ran as an 18-year-old senior in high school. So again, I put my heart out there. I put the effort into it for a number of years to get what I wanted out of that. I was hoping for even a little bit better, but I was very happy with that.
sure. So do you still run?
I, I had foot problems that arose a number of years later, and just last fall, I had major foot surgery to fix those. It was something that had been bothering me for a decade, and it's possible that I may be able to run again in the future. We'll have to see. I've got 21 pieces of titanium in my foot now.
Jeez.
Uh, so we'll see, but I'm walking better than I had for a decade. So,
Yeah. So is
and,
that,
and the issue with my foot was not running related. I double checked with my podiatrist about that. It
yeah,
wasn't just because I beat myself to death over the years. So
could have been. You did a lot, but that's awesome. Wow. I do love that, like how it is just your personality to be that determined,
yeah,
which absolutely comes in pretty handy given what you've had to face these last couple of years. Um, so yeah, where we left off in the last conversation was December 2021. So we're well past the beginning of COVID. COVID was its own Olympic sport of trying to run a grocery store during the global pandemic. More about that in episode 1 if you're interested. And then we get to December of 2021. You came home from the store that day and your phone rings. Why don't we pick it up right there and take us through what happened next?
I had been home about 15 minutes, and I just turned the TV on and was chilling for a little bit. Hadn't decided what I was going to do for supper yet, and my phone rang, and it was one of my employees, and Jason said, "You've got to get back down." And then a long pause, and the store's on fire. So I rushed out of the house, left my phone laying on the arm of the chair, and flew back down to the store. And I ran in and I set my keys down someplace as I ran in. I don't even know. There was one employee that was up front still, and there was a little bit of smoke coming from the back room that you could see. I opened up the door to the back room, and it was just pitch black. There was so much smoke that I couldn't see my hand 6 inches in front of my face. I grabbed a fire extinguisher, and every now and then I might see a flicker of a flame someplace, but I grabbed the fire extinguisher and I emptied it just blindly into the back room, and I knew that I wasn't doing any good. So I pulled that door shut. I went into my office for a moment, and I, I didn't know what to do, really. I reached into the safe and I took the money bag out of there, and there didn't seem to be too much else I could do. I ran back up front, and as I was going up the central aisle of the store, there's smoke coming through the floor around me. That employee had gone out the front door. There was nobody else in the store at that time. I opened up the cash registers and took the two drawers out of there and put them in the front seat of my pickup that I had parked out front, locked it. We've got the empty lot on the side of my building there. And I ran around the store and to the back alley, and there was a fire truck just to the right of my store and another one to the left of my store. And behind the store, we had a bin area that we threw our empty boxes in, uh, wooden enclosed. And a few of the boxes were burning, and Jason, my employee, and one of the um, firemen were pulling those out of there. They had a spigot mounted on the front of the bumper of that fire truck, and they were hosing that area down. You could see through some vents into the basement of the store. These boxes were partially burnt, but you could see through these vents into the basement of the store, and it was completely engulfed in flames as far as I could see. The fire truck from the other end of the alley had laid a hose up on my loading dock, and I ran up there and I grabbed that fire hose, and I didn't know what I was doing. I remembered over the years when I was in grade school or whatever fire safety training, feel the door before you open it up. It wasn't hot. I opened up the door, and now I'm seeing into the back room, just the opposite side from where I was before. And I could see flames everywhere. The walls were covered. They were climbing up the walls on that. And I turned the fire hose on and tried, putting out parts of the fire. I turned different directions. Things blew back at me at one point. I don't know if it was because I hit one of the electrical panels or, some other reason. The coat that I had on, I hadn't even taken my coat off when I got home yet, but the coat that I had on had burn marks all up and down one sleeve. I got burned on the back of one hand where embers blew back at me. But I could see that there wasn't anything I could do, or even if there was 10 firemen, that they were going to be able to do. The flames were just everywhere, including I had a very high ceiling. You could see how old this building was, and the ceiling in the back room was like 17, 19 feet, and it was on fire. So I used the handle on that hose and pulled the door shut, and I just walked away at that point. There were fire trucks all over. I went back out front, and by that time, I decided I didn't have my keys with me. I laid them down someplace in the store. I wanted to go back in and find them, and they wouldn't let me. Um, we had a cage in the front part of the store for propane canisters, and the firemen wanted to get those tanks out of the way. And they were there with bolt cutters on the padlock. I said, I can just run inside and grab the key. No, don't go in there. We didn't know how safe the floor was or anything like that. And I think I would have been all right, but it's probably best I didn't take, what difference does one padlock make compared to losing the whole store and possibly blowing everybody else up? But they took all of those propane tanks and moved them far away from there. The store basically burned to the ground. It burned all night long. There were 20 some fire departments that showed up from all over Southwest Iowa. Glenwood and Shenandoah had aerial trucks that they brought in. I did not see parts of Malvern had burned over the years, large parts of our downtown area, because all of the buildings were conjoined. The empty lot beside my store had been because one building had collapsed years ago and was torn down, partially collapsed and torn down. Everything north of there had burned at one point, and they rebuilt a building for a doctor's office now. But having seen that at times in my life, it's exactly what I expected to happen. I didn't see any way that they were going to be able to save all of those buildings you could see south of mine. That was the former bakery and a bar and our new pharmacy were down there, and apartments above the pharmacy, apartments above, or an apartment for the owners of the bakery was above the bakery there, because of all of those fire departments that came from all over. They were able to save it. Those aerial trucks made such a huge difference. It's a small town. The firefighters emptied our water tower in their efforts to fight this fire. Farmers were bringing tank wagons in, and they were filling up portable things that they set up with canvas or whatever on the street to provide more water for the firefighters. They were drawing out of there. We're about 35 miles from Omaha. All of the news channels from Omaha were there, and people were grabbing me. I was walking around. Some of the police were pushing me away, further away from the fire where they had things cordoned off. I was just a total mess, a total loss that evening. Um, one reporter did interview me, and I don't know what I said, but it was just devastating. I'd had the store for 13 and a half years at that point, and it was gone. And it wasn't just me; it was my great grandfather, my father, all of the people that had worked there over those years. Had put their heart and soul into it, and I was devastated. It it took a lot out. I barely slept that night. The next day, there were still little areas that were smoldering inside. The front of the building was still standing, but the roof had collapsed. Part of this north wall, just about where you can see here, was still standing, but behind that had collapsed. And like where my office was now 6 feet down into the basement. You couldn't you couldn't see you couldn't get in the door because the floors had collapsed everywhere. I could see in the back of the store where a new freezer was that we'd put in a year before that. The sunlight was coming through the hole in the roof, or the completely missing roof. You could still see pizzas in that freezer, but you couldn't get there because there's no floor between here and there. You could see different things that were around in different areas. Lots of television reporters and things that were all over. About 6 o'clock that morning, the one of my counselors from my grocery warehouse called the night before. We were supposed to get a delivery. The fire was on a Monday night. We were supposed to get a delivery and had sent the order for Tuesday morning delivery. And I called the dispatcher and I said, cancel our order. Store's gone. My counselor called me about 6 or 6:30 in the morning. He said, we're so sorry. What can we do for you? I'm totally devastated. I don't know. The one thing that came to mind was that my community has no water. I said that, once the firemen emptied out that water tower, even after it refills, it needs time for things to settle, any sediment or whatever. So I said that my community has no water. Please send something. By 9:30 that morning, there was a semi with 5 pallets of 24 packs and gallons of water. And I had nothing better to do. I'm down helping unload that. We called a farmers co-op and said, can you please bring a forklift up here. And they did. And we're unloading that. And a woman walks up to me. And I didn't know who she was, but what do you do here in the community? I said, that's my store. And she was a reporter. And she said she'd been talking to lots of people already. And she said, I'm not surprised at all that you're here doing this when your whole life has fallen in around you. You're here trying to help others. But I just didn't have anything else on my mind. There wasn't anything else I could do. You know, the state fire marshal was across the street. Anytime there's a business fire, of course, the first person that they look at is the business owner. And my insurance company, my agent was standing on the corner watching the fire the night before and said, we'll get everything taken care of. They sent down a couple of investigators. Something I haven't mentioned yet was that I was also going through a divorce that was just occurring at this time. So there's another red flag for the investigators. There were 5 investigators that looked everything over, and it was a very grueling few days between the devastation of losing the store, the people wondering if I had done this or whatever. 2 days after the fire, a horrible storm came through and the wall blew down. That wall that was still standing blew down. There was somebody that had a video camera set up across the street, and they captured that, and it can be found on YouTube. But that didn't matter. I mean, yes, it was just another nail in the coffin, but it was already gone. So in the long run, that didn't bother me that much or mean that much more. The far wall, the wall, conjoining wall with the bakery, had damage, and they weren't sure just how bad things were. So this fire occurred in December, but it was June before the debris was cleaned up because the structural engineers could not decide whether that wall was safe, whether it was stable enough that they could bring big equipment in here. And like I said, it was another 6 months then before the mess got cleaned up. And by then, the downtown area was really beginning to smell bad with all of the things that were in the freezers, the coolers, all of the meat that I had stayed cool through the winter after it got half cooked. But now lots of flies, lots of issues. And we're doing the best that we can, but unfortunately, that's just the type of situations that I've faced all along since then. It just seems like one delay after another, and another situation pops up that keeps things from happening like I expected. So yeah.
Yeah. Like I try to empathize and put myself in the shoes of like, you pull back up at the store and you unlock the door and like set your keys down somewhere because yeah, I can only imagine. Like,
Yeah.
and like you said, like I go into my office, like, and then it's just I don't know what to do. Like
Yeah.
it's so big and it's being taken away so fast that
I
like
had I had commented in the previous episode about having won an award from Facebook, I believe. And it had arrived earlier that afternoon, was sitting on my desk, and it burned. I certainly didn't think to get that. My billfold was on my desk right behind that award. I'd forgotten about it when I went home that evening. I hated sitting on my billfold when I'm doing paperwork, so I'd take it out, put it on my desk. That was destroyed. I asked someone to take me home that evening so that I could get a spare set of keys and move my truck because it was parked right in front of the store. And the firefighters need to be in there. The building could collapse on top of it. And, I went and I got my spare set of keys and I grabbed my phone. My daughter had been calling frantically, my ex-wife, because, they'd heard from people around town. They'd seen it on Facebook about what was happening, but they didn't know if I was safe or what was going on. So I called, them and or one of them, I don't even remember, and said, pass the message along. I'm fine, but, you know, totally devastated. I had to turn my phone off because I had so many texts, so many messages, so many calls coming in. The next morning, I had well over 200 messages that had come in over the past few hours. I had to go to Glenwood, the next town over, that morning. We had just unloaded the water, and I'm driving over there. I needed to get a new driver's license because my billfold was gone. That was one of the things I was doing. But my phone rang. I had all of the notifications for text messages and messages off, but the ringer was still on. It was the governor calling me. She and I had become acquainted and friends after winning that business contest. And she was calling and saying, how sorry she was and that, the state would do whatever they could to help me. And, there's one type of grant that our state has called the Emergency Catalyst Grant. And, she promised that one to me. That'll have to go through the city actually, but, that's been taken care of and will help a little bit on our rebuilding efforts as that happens. So,
What was it like? Because I mean, again, I can't even imagine what it's like to have the store burn down, like you're saying, of your dad's life, your grandfather's life, like all the people who had poured their heart and soul into it. So to like lose that, it it just is like numbing. That's like all I can feel is numb at
yeah,
how incomprehensible it is. But then to also have the added stress of they think you did it. Like,
yeah,
were you so like okay because like you just knew that you didn't? But yeah, what was that like? I mean, that's like a whole nother head trip on top
yeah.
of an
It
insane amount.
was, and you know, there were a few people around town, of course, that said, I think he did it. There's always going to be, you just like anything else, the best you can hope for is to please 97% of the people or something. And
Yeah.
yeah, but, I know, I've always known that I had no idea what it was. The investigation went on for months. They brought a backhoe in early February and were able to dig out some pieces of equipment. We had replaced one compressor just a few days before the fire, and it appeared that possibly the fire had started in the same general vicinity, the basement. So they did dig that out. They were able to rule that out between those five investigators because the neighboring building, their insurance company wanted an investigator there. Then they had an independent one to, double check on everybody else, things like that. So there were five different investigators that were going through everything. In the end, it was their combined opinion that it was careless smoking by an employee, which, if that were the case, that would have meant where those boxes were that I mentioned a while ago. Those boxes were only partially burned, but yet inside the building, behind that, you could see that the whole basement was engulfed in flames. So, in my mind, knowing what I saw, they're incorrect about that. I think it was something electrical in that basement, and then it came out and caught those boxes partially on fire.
Yeah.
But they that was an opinion. that was the best they could do. They couldn't ever pin it down on anything. And, but they also couldn't completely say that I didn't do it. So, while I wish they had been able to find the cause for that reason, that they could have cleared me completely. 98% of the people, know me, believe me, but you can't please everybody. For the rest of my life, there's always going to be a few people that wonder about that and say, I heard someone recently had been spouting off and said that they thought my ex-wife had done that. And I had a talk with, she's 100 miles away where she was living. And, I said that there was no way and they needed to quit talking like that. But, the investigators also reached out to her. And, what do you think about the possibility of Tom having done it? She said, no. She said that's part of our problem is the hours that he spends at work. That's his baby, and he's not going to burn that down. And so I appreciated that, and tried to do what I could to show my innocence or whatever.
Yeah.
There's just no way to prove something like that.
Hmm. That feels like a larger life lesson that we all learned somewhere along the way of like, yeah, when your innocence isn't provable and other people get to think whatever they want
Yeah,
and you just have to like deal. You just have to
yeah,
like be okay with it. Yeah. Do you feel like you've gotten better at like kind of letting people think whatever they want and
yeah.
not?
And there's a few different things that I've had to change my attitude about or whatever. People were, I've talked earlier about people coming up and giving me money to help those flood victims or COVID. Well, now I had people coming up and giving me money to help me. That that was hard. While we were unloading that water, there was a woman walking across the street and she had 5 smoked turkeys ordered for the following weekend that she was going to give as Christmas presents to some of her friends. And I yelled across the street to her. I said, Marilyn, I'm so sorry, but your turkeys are overdone. And I had to try to find a little bit of humor.
You do.
And she hadn't noticed me up until then. And she said, don't leave. She was a block from home. She ran back home and she came back. And this is about the time that this woman is interviewing me now, this reporter. And she gave me an envelope I put in my pocket. And later that day when I got home, I found that in my pocket and remembered, and I opened it up and $800 in cash in there. There were so many people that put $1,000 in my bank account or sent me a check or something like that, trying to help me come back to help the community. The bank started a GoFund Malvern page, and people from across the country were doing what they could, and I appreciated that. The Facebook group that I've commented about, I had put a post up Monday afternoon thanking everyone for this award that I had just won. And then later in the evening, I put another post up. I said 90 minutes after my earlier post, my building burned to the ground. It's gone. And these people were reaching out. How can we help? What can we do? And I know that there were many that donated to this fund. I would never have asked for anyone to do that, but they shared the link in the group, and that self-promotion is against the rules of the group, and I would never have wanted that, but they pinned that right to the top for a few days. There were other people that were already personal friends out of the group, because we enjoyed each other so much that we're sharing this and doing all they could, and I had a very hard time accepting people trying to help me. And a friend finally told me at one point, because I'm the one that's trying to help everybody else, that, I don't want people helping me. That's just not in my nature. And my friend told me to look at it as a that they are giving to the future of our community, that they're helping that future out. And that made things easier to deal with, but I still had a very hard time. My employees had lost their jobs. I couldn't pay them. I didn't have any checks. They'd all burned up. I didn't have a computer. I didn't have any credit cards. They were in my billfold. The bank got me some checks as quickly as possible. I called my CPA and sent him some information. All I had for a computer was a tablet and my phone, because I didn't have anything at home. I just never used one, and my wife had taken hers when she left. A person went and bought a computer and a printer for me, which I paid back once I had the ability, once I had checks. Um, the CPA figured out what the paychecks would be, and I got the employees paid. The fire was on Monday. Monday was payday. There was a few employees that hadn't picked up their check for the week yet. So they were doubly hurting. Insurance was going to pay my employees for 60 days. But it was a struggle for so many ways. My QuickBooks were on the computer that burned. I thought I had backed things up, but I couldn't find anything on the flash drive that I was sure it was on. My CPA helped me download QuickBooks onto the new laptop that I had bought, that the friend had bought for me. Bev was unbelievable, and doing anything she could to help me. And I thought I was going to have to rebuild 9 months of my QuickBooks, because the last backup that we could find was what I had given my CPA to do the taxes the previous March. So I thought we were going to have to rebuild that. A few days later, I tried that flash drive again. Now, because I had downloaded QuickBooks onto the computer, it would show that hidden file. So I had to redo, I think it was 2 weeks or 3 weeks since my last update. But I learned a few things about, having more and multiple backups, having redundancy on things like that. So you got to learn the hard way, having things in the cloud or whatever. As I've said before, this gray hair is because I'm old school, because I'm old, so some of the technological things that younger people take for, granted, are foreign to me, not things I grew up with or am used to doing. So, I don't always take the best methods or the easiest methods that are out there now. And I'm sure there's plenty of other people that are like that. So,
What you were saying about accepting help being a struggle, um, I just find it really interesting that that's like one of the things this situation forced you to confront. Like you said, you had to change your attitude about it. I
yeah,
love what your friend said. I mean, they're not handing money to just any person. They've watched what you do and they've seen you show up over and over and over. And it's like they're voting for you to get to keep doing what you're doing. You're an asset. And
I didn't use the proper word. What she told me was they are investing in your
yeah,
community's future.
yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. There, it's an investment in you, you getting on your feet and what you're capable of when you're on your feet. Like
yeah,
they want you back in action is what it sounds like to me. And Yeah, I wonder, do you think it's like just a generational thing or what what makes it extra difficult to think about someone helping you?
I don't think it's generational. I just think it's my makeup. And, again, I've commented about this Facebook group um, numerous times, but so many people have reached out and said that, they've seen how I don't give up in the face of a struggle, how I keep working towards that goal and how much it inspires them and means to them. And I'm not doing it for them, I'm doing it for me, but I do appreciate that. And again, it's what I said about that Boston Marathon attempt. I don't give up. And there's been so many struggles, so many delays, so many things that have worked against me as I'm trying to do this. But we're still plugging along and doing what's necessary and trying to make the best of the future and make that future happen as soon as possible. It
Yeah.
doesn't always seem that way with all of the delays and all the problems that I faced, but it's true. You know, I'm I had replacement cost coverage insurance, which in my mind means that I'm okay. The building will be rebuilt. You know, it doesn't. There's a cap on that. And insurance isn't going to be enough. So I'm way short on the money that I need, and we're trying to figure out how to get that. I'm looking for any possibilities that I can find, but I'm not slowing down in my efforts to rebuild. I'm going full speed ahead. I'm 63 years old. I'm gambling my retirement and my future, but I'm bringing that store back because my community needs it, because there isn't anything else. There's people that can't easily get the things that they need. So I'm going to do that no matter what it takes. And I'm facing all sorts of challenges and struggles, but I'm still going ahead. There's people that have said that I'm not hurrying through this because I'm still out there searching for money and on a publicity tour. And that's not true at all. I've had opportunities that have come to me, uh, and I appreciate them, and they've helped tell my story and bring to light the struggle and the things that I'm trying to do. But I'm not seeking these out, and I'm not going slower because I'm trying to find that money. It's not that I'm waiting until I've actually got the money in hand before I start the rebuild. It just hasn't happened for other reasons that are out of my control.
Yeah.
And I'm doing everything I can to get that rectified and to get things going as quickly as possible.
Which again, I feel like there's a life lesson in that because basically nothing is inside of our control. Almost
Yeah.
nothing, So when you think about we can personally go full speed ahead and the world just may not cooperate, Like it doesn't owe us its cooperation. You can have a heart of gold and the purest of intentions and still hit roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. And if anything, it feels like, you know, there is such a valuable example in all of this for anybody who takes it in my opinion. I know I definitely have been inspired by your story to like specific example, I was still ordering produce up until very recently, and it was one Sunday morning and I was like going to the store so I could look at my produce and like get my list together, and for half a second I had the thought, oh God, I gotta go do this. And like, just for a second, like I would rather skip this part and do something different. And then you popped into my head. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna like channel Tom today and I'm gonna go look at my store that is standing and I'm going to go look at my produce cooler that has food in it and I'm going to give freaking thanks that I get to go to the store today and order produce. It completely did a 180 on me in that moment. And that morning, I ordered produce with love because of knowing your story and knowing that, like, it could be taken away at any moment. Like you can go from having it to not having it in any moment. Don't take it for granted. And so that's something that, like, you don't have to be a grocery store owner to understand that. And, again, I go back to people are going to think whatever they want to think. And their narrative about what you're doing is so much more a reflection of them than it is of you. But I know I'm grateful to get to hear your story. And I hate that there's this delay for your community getting back its store. But I trust that this is bringing the pieces together the way that they need to be brought together. And, in the end, your perseverance, you don't give up. So I have no doubt that Malvern is on its way to having a store. And I would love if we could come back in a third episode and talk about the road to rebuilding, the the actual process of, like, okay, so now there's no store there. What do I do next? Like, it's not like you just snap your fingers, wave a magic wand, and there's a grocery store. um, it's a huge process to build something from the ground up, let alone, like you were saying, just even the cleanup took 6 months. Just even the fire investigation took several months. So how does that sound if we come back on the next episode and talk about the road to rebuilding and what that's
Sure.
been like?
Sure. As I've said, the opportunities that have come my direction, have been unbelievable.
Yeah. Your story is kind of unbelievable and it's heartbreaking, but even in the darkest moment, that's when you see the silver lining on the cloud. That's when you see the light that truly is real and shining. Even in the darkness, you can see it. And
These people that tell me how inspiring I am, or things like that, and I tell them I don't feel that I'm anything special. All I'm trying to do is the right thing, the way that I was brought up. And apparently that's extremely rare anymore, the way people react. And I it's just second nature to me. That's what I'm trying to do and what I want to do. It isn't for me. I could walk away and retire right now, but my community would never have a grocery store again if I did that. It's just too much to try to build one from scratch, and it wouldn't be able to pay for itself. But I can bring one back with the insurance, with the help of others.
hmm. And so you told me on a different conversation, but you want to bring the store back and then retire, like, in the next, like, 5 to 10 years. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, I'm 63 now. My original thought was that I would probably work another 4 or 5 years, something like that. I did have someone offer me a forgivable loan, but I had to commit to 5 years for that. And that means 5 years after I get started, after the store reopens. So it's more than what I wanted, but that's what was necessary to bring it back from my community. So I've agreed to that.
Mm,
So, and maybe things will be going great right then, and I won't want to go at that time. We'll see.
yeah, yeah. Mm. The way tragedy allows our common humanity to come to the surface, and, like, the people who show up and give you money, the people who, reach out and empathize with the struggle that you're going through, the people who just want to tell your story just because they want to help, raise the profile on your fundraising efforts.
Yeah.
Um, Actually, that's a perfect note. Do you want to show us your shirt and tell us about that?
Yeah. I've got a friend, this is the Phoenix. And next week, or next episode, I'll have my background being a painting that this same local artist, Zach Jones, did called Rise of the Phoenix, as Mulholland rises from the ashes. But a friend started this fundraiser on Bonfire, and I believe, and we'll put the link up here. I believe off the top of my head, it's Bonfire slash support Mulholland's, but we'll have the correct one here. But this is just one of a few different things that we're working on and trying to bring more money in to rebuild the store, for my community.
Beautiful. We'll definitely get more into the details, the journey of rebuilding that you've already been on, and kind of where you are in that process and what all would be left, what all goes into building a store. Just in general, I think not a lot of people deal with a ground up construction project in their lifetime, and probably just don't even have any reference point on what actually goes into that process. So I think that would be cool.
And that's where I started.
Yeah, was no background, no experience.
Yeah.
Whole nother
Yeah.
thing for you to get to learn. Great, you're good at that, apparently. So cool. Oh gosh. I am very grateful to have gotten to hear your story and to get to hear the the turmoil that's possible, and that, never ever are we going to see it coming, and that blindsided, devastated feeling that can happen. And then it literally is the phoenix rising from the ashes. It's, you know, just because the old form got burned to nothing doesn't mean that those ashes don't put themselves back together into something that possibly has an even greater value to deliver to the world and to your community. And I have to believe that everything happens for a reason, basically, and that this will be no different, that in the end, in the long run, Malvern will win as a result of what they've had to persevere through. And so, yeah, thank you for everything that you're doing for your community and this community, telling your story and letting us all see that, as often as we can give thanks for what we have, you just never know what.
You know, in your intro to, the podcast, you said that this is about helping others and showing how you can inspire people. And, I do appreciate that I have been able to do that in certain ways. Again, that isn't my goal. My goal is just to do the right thing. And that does it. That helps. That inspires people in some ways.
Yeah, just being
I'm
yourself.
glad I can do that. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. You just show up and be you. And it's huge. The ripple effect is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. This has been the second episode of My Grocery Adventure. Once again, my total pleasure to get to connect with Tom and share this story. We will be back on a next episode very soon. Until then, I do hope that you'll take really good care of yourselves, give thanks for everything that you have, and we'll see you again soon. All right. Bye.